From water to clothing to food, humans intake hundreds of tiny particles of plastic every day, whether they know it or not. The district's waterways have been filled with plastic pollution for years, both visible and invisible. The Anacostia Riverkeeper is an organization that works toward cleaning and preserving the Anacostia River. I sat down with Robbie O'Donnell, the organization's program manager, who has been helping to track the prevalence of microplastics in the waterway since 2019. Their most recent study from earlier this year found that microplastics are still prevalent in the river and are on par with other urban waterways.
The limits are high, we'll say. There's no real bar to kind of set it against. So the only thing we can do is compare it to other studies that have done similar collection methods across the US and the globe. So we found that they were similar levels to other rivers, but specifically urban rivers across the globe. So like the River Thames in London had very similar microplastics levels to the Anacostia, according to one study. So it was high. We basically collected samples in a 1 liter bottle and then sent them off to the lab. And in that 1 liter bottle, there were around 550 actual microplastic particles. Humans aren't going to be so much affected by the physical aspect of microplastics, i.e. they're not going to go out and eat microplastics or anything like that. They may eat them potentially if they're in fish or something like that. That's still being researched right now, if microplastics can work their way into fish tissue, and then they can eat them that way. But mostly that humans should worry about how microplastics can serve as carriers or vectors for more nefarious pathogens, bacteria, viruses, things like this. They like to hitch a ride onto hard things, so like microplastics. They're not going to dissolve into the water, and so if humans are recreating, if they're fishing, if they're just even boating and they get splashed with anything like that, the microplastics could be serving as ways for those pathogens to come in contact with humans.
For the Anacostia, local scientists suggest the source of this microplastic pollution is single-use plastics that have made their way into the river over time. In addition to just litter, stray trash that gets swept up in storm drains ultimately ends up in the water. The district government has taken some action in recent years, implementing a plastic bag tax and banning plastic straws in restaurants. But these measures place the onus on consumers to limit their use of these items, leaving the manufacturers with no real consequences. Some residents who live near the river, like Advisory Neighborhood Commissioner Dorothy Douglas, said the plastic bag tax hasn't done much to improve the river's cleanliness. She said she'd like to see district officials complete more check-ins on the river and educate young people on the issue.
I haven't seen no improvement from my experience, and I'm 73. Councilman Yvette Alexandra passed the plastic bag law, so that the river would stay clean and safe. But somehow or another, it hasn't been this. They're collecting 5 cents that you go and pay at the store to clean the bag. But the problem still exists. The folks are still throwing plastic bags, and plastic has really been an issue for many, many years. I would like to know where the money has gone to help to improve that problem so it won't be existing. And I know you can't do it all at one time, but if I would like to see a task force with our young generation, our young youth from high school to be involved and let them know how important. So if they could add that to their agenda on science or something, that could really be a good project and how to protect our national, really our climate.
For legislators to make informed decisions about laws, they needed clear evidence on the extent of plastic pollution in the river. A group of environmental scientists is currently working on a project to determine just how pervasive microplastic pollution in the Anacostia has become. Jessie Meiller is the director of undergraduate studies at American University's Department of Environmental Science. She's working with a team of other scientists to test the Anacostia's waterways for microplastics to ultimately determine how they make their way into the river.
So we have been seeing microplastics in all of the different sites. The more dense ones can settle out down into the sediment, and the lighter, more buoyant, less dense plastics can actually float in the water column. So we're looking in the water for the more buoyant microplastics, and we're looking in the sediment for the less buoyant or the more dense ones that settle out. A lot of the plastics are washing off of the land, and so it's coming from stormwater and from runoff of the land, litter and debris that's on the land. that gets carried down into either the storm drains and ends up in the waterways, or actually just washes directly into local waterways, tributaries to the Anacostia and the Potomac. We know that microplastics are a problem, but we need to demonstrate that and show evidence for where the microplastics are showing up. Having more information and having evidence and publications to actually show what's going on, I think will help to inform policy that can be made to try to decrease the amount of plastics that we're seeing in the environment, because we know that we're all being exposed to them, not just the organisms that live in the Anacostia, but we know that microplastics are actually occurring in all of the environments that we've looked at so far.
There's not much on the horizon for DC in terms of plastic legislation at the moment, although some measures are being taken on the national level to address plastic pollution nationwide. A group of senators introduced legislation earlier this session that would pause permits for plastic plants and ban some single-use plastic products. But corporations and congressional Republicans are pushing back on the bill, leaving the future of places like the Anacostia in flux.